The scent of roses and polished wood filled the air, blending with the distant hum of conversation and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. The grand reception hall was alive with celebration, laughter ringing out, the rhythmic sway of dancing couples, the steady flow of congratulatory toasts. It was a perfect night, the kind people dreamed about. And it was killing me. I stood near the bar, my fingers curled loosely around a glass of whiskey, watching the man at the center of it all. Ethan. My best friend since childhood. The groom. He looked the part of a man who had just married the love of his life. A crisp black tuxedo that fit him like a dream, his usually tousled dark hair neatly combed, a smile stretched across his face as he led his bride in their first dance. His wife, looked stunning, her white gown shimmering under the chandelier lights, her laughter light and melodic. She adored him. Anyone could see that. And yet, he wasn't really there. I knew Ethan better than anyone, better than she ever would. And I could tell that something was off. His smile was perfect, too perfect. The kind of smile that he used when he was trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. I took a slow sip of whiskey, letting the burn ground me, trying to silence the storm inside my head. This was his wedding day. His wedding day. It wasn't my place to feel like this. And yet, I did. I had spent years pushing down feelings I never had a right to have. Years pretending that the little moments, the lingering glances, the late-night talks that lasted until sunrise, the way he always seemed to be closer to me than necessary, meant nothing. But standing here now, watching him move across the dance floor with his wife, the reality of it all crashed into me with the force of a freight train. This should be the part where I let go. Where I finally accept that whatever unspoken thing had existed between us was just that, unspoken. It had never been real. But then he looked at me. Not a glance. Not a casual acknowledgement. A look. One that lasted too long, one that lingered, one that made my breath hitch in my throat. I had spent my entire life memorizing Ethan's expressions. I knew every smirk, every eye roll, every twitch of his lips when he was holding back a laugh. And I knew this look. This wasn't the look of a man whose life had just begun. This was the look of a man who felt like he had just lost something. A slow, suffocating realization settled in my chest. He didn't want to be here. Not with her. And suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I turned away before I could do something reckless, before I could let my own desperation show on my face. My heart was pounding too hard, my pulse a chaotic drum against my ribs. This was insane. I had no right to feel like this. No right to let myself believe, even for a second, that Ethan was thinking about me in the way I was thinking about him. Because if he was, then what the hell were we doing? I barely registered the hand clapping against my shoulder, the familiar voice breaking through my tangled thoughts. Enjoying yourself? I turned to see Ben, one of our oldest friends, grinning at me over his own glass of scotch. He was already a few drinks in, his tie loose around his neck, his jacket discarded somewhere. Sure, I lied, forcing my lips into something that might have resembled a smile. Ben chuckled, giving me a knowing look. You've been standing here for an hour, Alex. I'm pretty sure that's your third whiskey. I shrugged, swirling the liquid in my glass. Just soaking it all in. His gaze flickered toward Ethan, then back to me, something unreadable passing over his features. Yeah, he said, voice quieter. I bet you are. There was something in his tone that made my stomach clench. But before I could say anything, someone called his name from across the room, and he clapped me on the back before disappearing into the crowd. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. I needed air. I slipped out of the reception hall, stepping onto the large balcony overlooking the venue's sprawling gardens. The cool night air hit me instantly, a welcome contrast to the overwhelming heat of the room behind me. The music was softer out here, the distant murmur of laughter blending into the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I leaned against the railing, staring up at the stars, my mind still spinning. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be feeling like this. And then, before I could process what was happening, I wasn't alone anymore. The sound of footsteps behind me. The quiet click of the balcony door closing. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I already knew who it was. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, before Ethan finally spoke. "I was looking for you." His voice was quiet, steady. But I could hear something underneath it. Something frayed. Something unsteady. I forced a short laugh, trying to sound normal, casual, anything but what I was actually feeling. "You're supposed to be inside, celebrating with your wife," I said, my grip tightening on the railing. Ethan didn't respond right away. And then, "I know." That was it. Just 2 simple words. But somehow, they made my stomach drop. I finally turned to look at him. He was standing just a few feet away, his tie slightly loosened, his expression unreadable. The reception hall lights cast a warm glow over his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the crease between his brows. His eyes were on me, only me, like there was no one else in the world. My chest tightened. We had stood like this 1,000 times before. In locker rooms after games, in my bedroom after too many beers, on road trips when we stopped at gas stations in the middle of nowhere. Always close. Always on the edge of something. But tonight, it was different. Because tonight, he belonged to someone else. And yet, "I shouldn't be here," Ethan said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. And for the first time that night, I let myself acknowledge the truth. Neither should I. The silence stretched between us, thick enough to drown in. Ethan was still standing there, hands shoved into his pockets, shoulders tense. The dim glow from the reception hall filtered through the glass doors behind him, making the sharp lines of his tuxedo more pronounced, casting his face in half shadow. He looked lost. Not in the way people get when they forget where they parked their car or can't recall a name in conversation. This was something deeper. Like he was standing on a cliff's edge and didn't know whether to jump or step back. I had seen Ethan at his lowest before. After football losses, when he got rejected from his dream university, when his parents nearly divorced. But I had never seen this. And yet, I still couldn't move. I wanted to be the one to tell him to go back inside. To tell him this was nothing, that he had everything waiting for him in that reception hall. That the woman he had just vowed to spend his life with was waiting for him. But my throat had closed. I could still feel the weight of his eyes on me, like an anchor pressing against my chest, keeping me frozen in place. Then, before I could force out something rational, something to end this, he spoke. "Alex," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me I did the right thing." My stomach twisted. My fingers curled tighter around the railing. I knew what he was asking. He wasn't looking for reassurance. He wasn't asking me to comfort him. He wanted permission. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs, my breath unsteady. I should lie. I should tell him, "Yes, Ethan. You married the love of your life. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Instead, what came out was, "I don't know." The word shattered the last fragile thread between us. Ethan's shoulders tensed. His breathing changed, slower, heavier, deeper. The air around us thickened, charged with something neither of us wanted to name. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he took a step closer. And I let him. The space between us was disappearing. I could feel the heat of him, the way his chest moved with each breath, the unspoken tension that had been building for years now pressing against my skin like a vice. "Alex," he murmured again, my name slipping from his lips like a confession. And then, before I could stop him, before either of us could think, he kissed me. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision. A breaking point neither of us had been able to outrun. His hands found my face, pulling me into him, his lips urgent, desperate. There was nothing slow about it, nothing careful. It was teeth and heat and years of unspoken feelings crashing down in an instant. I sucked in a sharp breath as his fingers slid into my hair, tightening as if daring me to pull away. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I had imagined this before. Too many times. In fleeting thoughts I forced myself to ignore, in dreams I woke up from with my heart racing. But this? This was real. And it was ruining me. Then, a loud burst of laughter echoed from the reception hall. The sharp clang of a fork against a champagne glass. Ethan stiffened. His hands faltered. The spell shattered. He pulled away so fast it felt like I had been burned. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his hands trembling at his sides. His lips were swollen, red, a silent reminder of what had just happened. A reminder that we had just crossed a line we couldn't uncross. His eyes darted to the doors, then back to me, panic setting in. His voice cracked. He shook his head, looking completely unmoored. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I didn't follow him. I couldn't. I stood there on the balcony for what felt like an eternity, my heart slamming against my ribs, my skin still burning where he had touched me. Everything felt too much. The wind. The night air. The echo of his lips against mine. I didn't know how long I stood there, but eventually, my feet moved. I wasn't thinking, wasn't processing. My body was running on instinct, leading me back inside, where the music still played, where people still danced, where Ethan's wife was laughing at the center of it all. Where he was. I caught sight of him near the far side of the hall, standing stiffly as people crowded around him, congratulating him, toasting to his happiness. But he wasn't happy. Not even close. And then, his eyes found mine. Everything else blurred. I barely registered the music, the guests, the fact that I shouldn't even be here anymore. All I could see was the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched like he wanted to reach for me. And I realized, with a clarity that terrified me, this wasn't over. Not even close. I don't know who moved first. I just know that 1 second, we were in the reception hall, and the next, we were alone. A back room. Somewhere dimly lit. Somewhere we weren't supposed to be. His breathing was ragged, his hands shaking as he braced them against the door. "This is wrong," he whispered. I swallowed hard. "Then tell me to leave." His eyes flickered to mine. And then, he didn't. The next second, his mouth was on mine again. The world outside didn't exist anymore. His hands were everywhere, gripping my shirt, fisting in my hair, pressing me back against the wall. There was no hesitation this time. No restraint. I felt everything. The heat of his body. The press of his weight. The sheer need in the way he touched me, like he was unraveling at the seams. His jacket hit the floor. My fingers slipped beneath his shirt, tracing the familiar lines of his back, his muscles tensing beneath my touch. A choked sound left him, and I swallowed it whole. Everything about this was reckless. Everything about this was dangerous. But neither of us pulled away. Not even when we heard the distant sound of voices outside the door. Not even when we knew that if we got caught, everything would fall apart. Because it already had. And in this moment, neither of us cared.